You're watching Inside the Right. So Tim with Donald Trump violating his gag order so freely. This isn't the Manhattan criminal trial. It kind of struck me that Trump might actually be trying to get jailed. That was followed by his lawyer, Alina Habba, saying this. I think, like anybody, he's concerned about going to jail. But if they put him in jail for his First Amendment right, he will be like Nelson Mandela. I mean, that would be just absurd. And frankly, they'll win the election. And of course, Trump himself took to choose social and wrote, "If this Hardison hack wants to put me in the clink for speaking open and obvious truth, I will gladly become a modern-day Nelson Mandela." Tim, what is your take on this? Do you think that Trump is actually trying to get himself thrown in jail? On the one hand, I'm pretty surprised he knows who Nelson Mandela is, though most of Trump's references are from like the 80s and 90s tabloid era, so maybe Nelson Mandela was in the New York Post once or twice back in the day, I guess. I don't think that Donald Trump wants to go to jail. Even for a night. I don't think that he'd enjoy that very much. And also kind of, there's a weakness, a meekness right to having to submit like that I think that he would be very afraid of. I do think he wants to be the victim badly though, and it's evidenced by what you talked about social media accounts. It's evidenced by the emails and texts. I don't know if you suffer through those, but I get them on Donald Trump's list, so I can kind of see what he's saying and a huge percentage of those fundraising emails and texts over the past few days have been, "Oh, woe is me, they're not letting me see the graduation. They're going to put Nelson and all this sort of, victim stuff. They're treating me poorly." And so I do think that he wants to push the envelope as much as possible to kind of get wrapped on the knuckles, so he can get the victimology out of it, without necessarily having to, actually suffer consequences. That's bought for Donald Trump, breaking the rules as much as possible, without actually suffering consequences. So I think that's what he's trying to do this time as well. Just sidebar on this, I guess Donald Trump and his MAGA wing of the party, they kind of see their identity as being the alphas. So how do they reconcile being alphas with also trafficking in such blatant, perpetual victimhood and this whole woe is me aggrieved thing? Yeah, it is. So phony, isn't it? I think these are the one. Not only is it fun? I mean, of course it's phony, but it just seems to be so off-brand that if you're the tough guy, I mean, Donald Trump's whole thing is that if you've used himself as a strong man, but then to walk around and just constantly bitch and moan on a daily basis seems so antithetical to his own branding. Yeah, not to be used. Outdated pop culture references myself after criticizing Donald Trump for it. But I think these guys see being tough as being the tough gun in the schoolyard, like Nelson and the Simpsons are Cartman. I really think that's how they are envisioning it. Now, we all know that those characters, like the schoolyard bullies, are actually very weak and scared on the inside, and don't actually want fights, but I think that's the kind of persona they are putting on right, where and I think that a lot of people they're appealing to are these, men who have anxieties, who feel like the culture doesn't appreciate them, and so I think that they're preying on those guys as well, and that's kind of who it's landing with. And you see this across culture. I mean, Andrew Tate, all these fucking guys, right? Just like really insecure guys who have to overtly try to prove their manhood. This is like the political equivalent of these guys who throw weights down in the gym while screaming as loud as they. Yeah, exactly. This whole victimhood stick where he's trying to possibly get himself locked up so that he could appeal to his base clearly works with those people, in his base. But is this not a major miscalculation, given that we are now in general election mode? Does he really think that independent voters, or those suburban moms out there, are going to want to vote for a guy who's literally either trying to get himself placed in a jail cell, or physically sitting himself in a jail cell? Yeah, two things are happening here. I think one is, I don't think he's thinking about the swing voters. I think he's thinking about money. How, going back to this text and emails, how can I use this to help bridge this gap I have with Joe Biden? It's worked for him over the years. That's how he's raised money, by doing the victim. Stick the deep states out to get me. These people out to get me. So I think that that's part of it. I also think that they have bought their own BS on this whole young black man and young panic man, who have also feel like they've been mistreated by the police, are going to resonate with this, and it's just there's not a ton of evidence of that's happening. Donald Trump has done marginally better. Among working class Hispanics, I think that men in particular, I think that's probably more due to inflation and other issues than it is due, like the fact that they look at him and they're like, I resonate with that. Because the cop was once meaning to me too. I think that's a lot of B. But I do think that Trump team has kind of bought it, and they think that they can kind of hit a nerve with working class, vote like voters that have traditionally been Democrats, and win them over with this performance. I don't buy it, but I think that that's one of their calculations. It's that group, not the suburban moms are trying to get to. Is it possible that, in kind of casting this off that, there is some sense of naivety among the left like, is there a way that this could, redondo Trump's benefit, by actually making it look like the evil, communist Marxist Democrats are jailing Joe Biden's top political opponent? I don't really think so. I think it's pretty tough to see that there's any benefit of having to sit in a courtroom all day and, fall asleep and get made fun of on a campaign. I guess I will say my only caveat to that is, he did after the court yesterday. You'd go to Harlem, and there's kind of a man on the street thing. And he's a celebrity, right? So there's kind of an excitement to see him among certain people, right? I would be very excited to see them. But there's certain people that are like, oh, Donald Trump, these runs and so, maybe he can gin up some everyman appeal with that crowd. But it's the A for starters. It's the least frequent, it's the least likely group to vote. So, he's trying to churn up low info people who are super into celebrities who don't like politics, or like kind of democratic, that don't really care about policy. Okay, if that's the group you're going to try to get at, that's not the most reliable voter. Maybe I wouldn't say there's a 0% chance the gambit could work, but I think it's a stretch. So what's the strategy here? Just go to court all day, and then stroll into Harlem, and hope that the 27 people that you come across will somehow find their way into a voting booth like 8, or maybe the videos. I don't actually think that the strategy is gonna work. I'm just trying to explain to you what I think. I think that they would say that okay, here's Donald Trump, now go, and there's some black people cheering for him, and that video is gonna get on TikTok and, like other black folks, are gonna see it on TikTok and I go wait, hey, maybe Donald Trump's not racist. After all, maybe he does like black people. I think it's kind of a preposterous strategy. But that this is inside the right. You're asking me what I think that they're thinking. And that's what I think that they're thinking. Fair enough. And to that point, for folks watching right now, if you want to get a better perspective into what's happening on the right, but from the perspective of this pro-democracy faction of Republicans, please subscribe to The Bulwark. It's Tim's YouTube channel. He's on it throughout the week. I'll put the link right here on the screen, and also in the post description of this video. If you're not yet subscribed, they make excellent content over there, and it's also important to elevate these voices of reasonable Republicans who aren't willing, and former Republicans reasonable, and former Republicans who aren't willing to cow to the Donald Trumps of the world. Tim, when a bunch of Republicans were polled during the primary, they said that they wouldn't be willing to vote for a convicted felon. I think there was somewhere between 10 and 30% of these Republicans, depending on the state. How solid do you think that sentiment is versus how many will ultimately come home to Trump in the end? Because now he is on trial. He does face the imminent prospect of becoming a convicted felon. There's certainly some percentage of people that said they wouldn't go for convicted felon that will backtrack, right? Of them are. It's kind of it's a safe thing to say. There's a social desirability element to this. I wouldn't vote for a convicted felon, right? But a lot of these people, if you would have asked them, would you vote for somebody who instigated a riot on